maybe your personal channel that we were connecting to for the live stream.
Okay.
But the live stream is now on the Kubernetes page.
Thank you so much. So we'll get you a drink.
Getting it working on that.
No, I appreciate it. Julia. I think I can start.
Do you want some pizza? Otherwise, you're not going to get it.
Yeah.
I'm going to get you some.
Maybe just put it somewhere. Thank you so much. Hello, everybody. We're going to start shortly. We just had a small technical issues. We just fixed them, so we actually streaming live this session, so you can wave the hands and people is going to see you. then this one. Julia, do you think you can also post to our containers channel in our in our meetup in our CloudOps channel as well?
Containers?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
You did?
Pieces on the
Okay,
bar.
perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah. Oh, actually, works. All right. So you don't need this. Here, just in case. Yeah, yeah. This is for us. If you want to sit with.
You're gonna do the intro, right? You're all
Yeah.
set? Do you need me for anything?
No, I mean just maybe if you want to if you want to start or if you want to just be around, like just say hi. Okay. Kicking the tires. Uh, maybe I'll forget something. Usually, you're starting all the time, right? Like just saying, hey, this is like.
I can say something because it's like really nice.
I will do it in.
Can you turn it the other way? Because I don't want it to hit the thing.
Like this. All right, guys, we're starting now. Please take your seat. Yeah. Okay. Wow. We just announced this meetup a week ago, and we had like 140 people coming. It's amazing. Thank you very much. Happy New Year. So this is our first Kubernetes meetup of the year. We have a new sponsors new faces that you haven't seen probably before. Aqua Security was our sponsor last year, and they joined again to be a sponsor. So Aqua is a security company that does image scanning, image policies, and stuff like that. Microsoft as well, since in the past we had Days, one of our sponsors, and Days guys joined Microsoft, and then they said a lot of good stuff about our meetups, so Microsoft decided to be one of our main sponsors as well. And they actually promised to send $500 credits for Azure Cloud, maybe for the next meetup. CloudOps, as usual, our sponsor as well. Thank you, CloudOps, for hosting us and organizing and giving me, myself, and Julia time to work on the meetups. And finally, Red Hat, also one of our main sponsors. We also have new faces, JFrog and GitLab. So JFrog's supposed to present today, but unfortunately, they couldn't make it, so they will be in different cities. If you have questions, let me know. I can ask them and put it back in the Slack channel. And also GitLab, it's a new sponsor as well. They want to be present more in Canadian, market, and they want to talk about how we can use Kubernetes with GitLab. So we're looking forward in Q2 maybe have us presenters from GitLab. Today also Covalent, one of our co-sponsors. Cynthia, she will talk more about what is Covalent and what they're doing. But that said, we're expecting to have more sponsors. This is just the beginning of the year was very busy, so that's what we have for now. But we're looking forward. If anybody of you want to sponsor, we will be happy to. Julia, you want to add something in terms of? No. Okay. There's more. Okay. So this is our Slack channel. Hopefully you already joined. if not, just take a picture and then you can register. It's already like we have over 400 people in Canada who is registered, and people just helping each other, asking questions. We're also putting all the slides from the all cities, the videos, and all the information, all the updates. So it's pretty active channel. Thanks to the active guys, actually, Alex, and there's a few other very helpful, so I appreciate. We should give something to Alex, I think. Alex, thanks for your help. Okay. Yeah, as usual, we're asking for your support where you can. If you have any friends, you can spread the words. So we just started meetups in Kitchener and Waterloo. The first meetup we had around 20 people, and we're expecting to have more this time. But if you have any friends, you can let them know that there is a meetup in their area. Also, please submit the talks. So for this time, we don't have anybody submitted. Actually, UQAM really want to present, but we already kind of aligned the talks. So hopefully next time UQAM will present. But if you have more things to present, we'll be very happy. Just submit a talk, and we have a form to do that. Regarding the sponsors, again, just reach out to the meetup.com, and if you have any, free time help to plan the events, we're also gonna appreciate that. Yeah, and we also started to provide workshops in Canada. So I actually did already around 15 workshops. Getting tired actually, but enjoying. It's fun time. So we have workshops around Docker and Kubernetes, CI/CD with Kubernetes, and then more like day 2 operation with Docker and Kubernetes. And then if you running the Kubernetes and cloud providers like Google Cloud, Azure, and Amazon, we are currently partners with all of them, and they help us also to build the content for today's workshop. So if you have questions, let us know. So for today agenda, pretty short. I will cover some updates for CNCF and Kubernetes, 1.9 update. We also have special guests from Envoy, from Lyft. So Envoy is getting so popular. We had a last meetup with DataWire, and there was a huge interest. And when Constance reached out to us, I actually met her at KubeCon, and she kindly proposed us, to have a talk one day, and we agreed. And then it just happened within a week. She sent us notice that she's coming, and we quickly organized the meetup. So Constance is going to present us how Lyft used Envoy in the beginning and what's their plans. So now Envoy used to be Lyft's internal project, and now it's part of CNCF. So it's kind of becoming global known project. And however, still Lyft still very active contributors, and Matt, one of the co-workers of Constance, he's the most active and the kind of leading this project. We also have another guest from Silicon Valley, Cynthia. So she's from Covalent.io. It's a new company, and they also have some story around service meshes. So she's going to tell the story, what are they doing, and their networking called Cilium. So it's also very, very interesting and very popular thing right now. So we apologize that we had a very short notice, and we will try to potentially make another meetup in Q1, because there was a lot of interest in other presenters that potentially may occur. So we might have 2 meetups in Q1. Just stay tuned if we'll be able to work it out. Julia, yeah.
Hi, everybody. It's very hot in here. Sorry, we have the windows open, but 2 things. I just want to thank Cynthia and Constance for coming, because they're both from afar, so that's very cool, and it speaks to how greatly our community is growing. So thank you both for coming. Also in Montreal, it's the first time we have some lady speakers, so that's very cool. So I see some women in the crowd. Don't be shy and submit a talk. Girl power. The other thing I wanted to say is just to congratulate Archie. No, I can't say? Don't be shy. You were going to tell them? Oh, okay. I'm stealing his thunder. Archie became a CNCF ambassador for all the work. Yeah. Yeah. For all the work that he's doing around building these communities. So we're very proud of him. Yeah, but we're very proud of him, and yeah, he's working really hard for everybody. So yeah, just wanted to congratulate him for all his hard work. And now you can say you know an ambassador. That's pretty cool.
Thanks, Julia. So I'll actually talk about a little bit of ambassador thing, just to explain what is that and what does that mean to our community. Okay, so let's carry on. As you noticed, maybe I don't know, maybe you just freshly joined Kubernetes, but people who were in our meetups for 2 years now, we used to be called Kubernetes Meetup Canada, and now you suddenly notice probably that we called Kubernetes Canadian and CNCF meetups. So we kind of changed a little bit the theme. Again, if you remember, back in the days, everything was like we were in the Docker meetups talking about Kubernetes. And then these days we have more and more people coming to Kubernetes meetup and talking about Envoy, about Prometheus. So we decided, because there's such a huge interest in our community to learn about cloud native projects, we decided to merge those two meetups. And we actually from the beginning kind of thought about it to call cloud native meetups, but I think it would be very confusing for people because it's something new and people not really know what is cloud native and CNCF. So we decided to start with Kubernetes, and we knew that Kubernetes is going to become something bigger than just Kubernetes, and pretty much that was the case. Right now, Kubernetes itself is already kind of stabilized. There's nothing happening in that space. We already know Kubernetes, so we want to learn more about cloud native. So what is cloud native? Is actually several projects backed by Linux Foundation, and of course, Kubernetes is the most popular of them. We already know very well. But we also, last year, we talked a lot about Prometheus. We actually having a talk planned in Quebec City about open tracing and Jaeger. And today we have 2 talks actually about Envoy. So that's pretty cool. Core DNS as well is becoming potentially the future DNS for Kubernetes. So all of those projects are working nicely together, and expect that if you're using Kubernetes, one day you're going to be look at Prometheus, Open Tracing, FluentD. All of those projects are going to help people to build microservices and pretty much simplify the life of the developers. We also actually have just a new announcement. We have Project Rook, who just joined the CNCF. So anybody knows what is Rook? Okay, so there are some people who know. Cool. So maybe old things becoming good again. You probably heard about Project Ceph, that it has been there for a while. So it's a distributed storage that you can deploy on the hardware, and you can have block, object, and file system storage. So what happened? There was kind of an effort to move this project into containers, and then if you know, in Kubernetes we have something called operators that simplifies the lifecycle of application. So basically what they did, they put Ceph into containers and created an operator for Ceph. And then this project starting to be called Rook. And just a week ago, there was voting, and Rook became official CNCF project. So we're hoping that finally we're going to have some cloud native storage in Kubernetes that you can easily deploy and use. And I'm sure everybody is having problems right now with storage, right, on Kubernetes. Unless you're running in Amazon, Google, maybe where these things are kind of solved. But if you're running on premises, I know like some guys tried Gluster and then kind of backed up, and there's like back and forth. So Rook hopefully is going to get more mature, and there's going to be a lot of attention around that. So we're hoping that it's going to be a successful project. Any questions so far? Docker? You mean the containerd? Or so there's containerd, and there was, yeah. This was kind of donated by Docker to CNCF. Okay, so A little bit about Cloud Native Ambassadors program. So we call it CNA program. It exists to kind of help communities and members with the support to run the meetups. So basically, CNA promote cloud native projects and technology, and also try to educate local community what is CNCF. So basically what we're doing here. And the people who are kind of part of this called Cloud Native Ambassadors. So those kind of persons that are passionate about this CNCF and the technology and projects. So today we have around 40 ambassadors worldwide, and you probably know some of them. Lucas, who is like one of the main contributors to KubeADM project. There's like a bunch of nice guys. Like if you go into the Cloud Native Ambassador webpage, you will see a lot of familiar faces, and like highly recommend to follow them in Twitter, because they always tweet very interesting stuff, and they present and do a lot of nice things. So yeah, that's pretty much just last week there was an announcement that there's 4 new ambassadors has been selected, and this guy already been ambassador from the day one, Kelsey Hightower, but we also have one more familiar face there, and this hopefully gonna give us much better presentation. We'll get more people who can be able to come here and present. They're also going to support us from Cloud Native Foundation with different swag, and we'll see. Like, I mean, the program is still evolving, but definitely there's going to be extra help for us to run the meetups that we're doing right now. Any questions for the meetup? CNA? No? Okay. Okay, so some updates, Kubernetes and CNCF updates. So this is just flashback from the last year. Maybe some of you just joined. So in March, we had a KubeCon at Berlin, and we had a record attendance, 1,500 people. It was pretty interesting, but it was a lot of European companies, so for me it was kind of unusual, but it was still very, very good event. And then in September, I don't know if you remember, there was Linux Foundation announced the Certified Kubernetes Administrator exam. So if you want to become professional in Kubernetes, you can pass this CKA exam, and then pretty much, just update your LinkedIn and see what happens. So if the company will have 3 or more people who pass the CKA exam, the company automatically becomes certified Kubernetes certified service provider, and it's going to be in Kubernetes.io website, and pretty much anybody can. You're going to be officially recognized company who can work with Kubernetes and support companies around Kubernetes. Also in November, there was launch of certified Kubernetes program. So there was company called Haptio. They created a tool that kind of runs the tests. And if the distribution passes this test, it becomes certified Kubernetes. So it's like there's right now 32 vendors that pass this test, and you can go on the website of the certified Kubernetes distributions, and you can pretty much know who is actually doing. So like guys like CoreOS, guys like Red Hat. There's like the whole list. Even Alibaba passed the certification. And then in December, there was the biggest KubeCon so far in Austin. We actually had over 20 people from Canada who was there. We had one presenter from Ottawa, Shopify, who presented. So it was really, really good event, except that it was very cold, and we have to, cancel some parties. But like it was pretty good. And then CNCF itself, right now, it's a huge organization. There's over 160 members. So companies like Amazon, Microsoft, Oracle, they join and supporting this direction. And finally, in December, our company CloudOps, we had 5 guys who passed the CK exam. So we now become official Kubernetes certified service provider. So good job. Actually, I haven't passed the exam yet, so I'm looking forward. It was a busy year. So as you can notice, every year, the first KubeCon was in San Francisco, then London, then Seattle. Actually, I was in the last 3. You can see the popularity of Kubernetes is growing. So the next one, meetup, the next Kubernetes conference potentially is going to be even more. And this is just our meetups. Also, like we part of this, we're growing. There's over 40,000 people who joined the CNCF meetups right now. Some latest news, probably if you're on the Kubernetes channel, you're already aware. So the first two, we have two cloud providers, Amazon and Azure. They launched their managed Kubernetes service. Similar to Google Cloud, they have GKE. So in Amazon, we have EKS, and in Azure, we have AKS. So, however, they're still pretty much in the launching mode, so you cannot really try them. Maybe in AKS you can, but like EKS is still not announced yet, but they just said that it's going to be ready soon. And then pretty much yesterday, we had a breaking news where Red Hat acquired CoreOS. So congrats to Brandon, who, the guy who's running the company. They raised 250 million. So it was major event, I think. Kind of sad for me because I like CoreOS. They were one of our sponsors as well, so we're gonna miss them. But they're gonna join forces, hopefully, and they're gonna hopefully get better Kubernetes, and we're looking forward. There's one small announcement, but the guys from Gymnasium who were presenting in our meetup, it was in Quebec City. They were talking about their journey with OpenShift. They've been acquired by GitLab, so like Canadian company will help GitLab to make their security better. So image scanning and GitLab or something like that. We'll see the announcements also coming. So what's going to be the events in 2018? So the next big event is going to be in Copenhagen, KubeCon. So hopefully somebody of you can make it there. We're looking forward. So we have a channel already for that event. If you want to start planning, we're going to be there helping you. Actually, right now the hotel's on discount, so if you're planning, it's a good time. And then we're going to have KubeCon in Shanghai. So this is going to be in November, and then pretty much right after that, there's going to be KubeCon in Seattle again. So Seattle was a very good place for the KubeCon. We really enjoyed it, so we decided to do another KubeCon in Seattle. All right, so finally, something you probably wanted to hear. What is new in Kubernetes 1.9? Pretty much nothing. It's like all the same. Like most of the features already there. However, there's still new ideas people have, and they're trying to push them into Kubernetes. So I'll just do the quick cover of what's there and new for you. So 1.9 release was kind of very short, and because there's a lot of holidays, there's Christmas, there's Black Friday, and so it was very, very short. So not a lot of features went there. Almost 40 new features, and the main focus was into workload security and extensibility and storage. So some of the notable features, I think this one is the biggest. If you remember, if you're using 1.8 or 1.7, your deployments still in beta, your daemon set still in beta. Once you upgrade to 1.9, all of the workloads is going to be stable and is going to be GA, and you're going to see like all the manifest is going to start with V1. That means the work has been finished, everything is stable, and when you're going to have upgrades, now it's going to be much easier. You don't have to really change your manifest anymore, at least for the workloads part. Questions on that? No? Okay. So who knows what is the DNS in Kubernetes we have? kubedns. So yeah, unfortunately, or fortunately, kubedns life is going to get shorter soon. So we're planning to integrate new DNS in Kubernetes called Core DNS. It's going to be much more extendable, so it's going to be much easier to do things like federations and add new features into Kubernetes. So the guys who wrote initial kubedns, they had very small kind of agenda, and now there's much more different use cases. So they're adding Core DNS. Right now it's in alpha. So if you like kubeadm, you can already deploy kubeadm with Core DNS and start playing around, and maybe present in our next meetup. What's your experience? So container storage interface. Do you guys know how many interfaces we have in Kubernetes? Anybody remembers any interfaces? Which one? CNI. Yeah, it's container networking interface. Yeah, CRI. CNI, CRI, CSI, OMI. Is so many of them. So the next one is container storage interface, and actually all storage vendors are super excited because they can finally easily integrate their NetApps, their EMCs into Kubernetes. So that was like, for them before it was very hard. The storage part was kind of built into Kubernetes core. It was like monolithical, and then they put it on external repo. It was still hard to write, and now they decided to create interface similar to CNI, where now anybody can pretty much write the networking interface to Kubernetes. Same thing is going to be with storage now, and hopefully we'll have much more vendors and much more option available with Kubernetes. Right now it's still an alpha, but in 1.10 is going to be much more integration, and hopefully it's going to be beta. Yeah. Yeah. Mhm. Yeah, so it's a good question. Storage classes is something you can specify, and you can have multiple storages attached to Kubernetes, right? But the problem is like there's a huge complaint because the vendors who are writing the plugins, they've no idea how to do it, and they've been using Docker's volume plugin, and like, I mean, some of the like NetApp is very advanced, they wrote it, but like other companies, they're still having hard time, and there's more and more features like snapshots, like backups in Kubernetes, right? So like it's very hard for them to write those things. With CSI, it's going to be just an interface where they just have to define how to attach to the Kubernetes, and it's going to be much easier for them to maintain. And also for in the past, it was very hard to test. So nobody want to test, like Kubernetes community don't want to test vendors plugins, and the guys from like the vendors, they also don't know how to test their stuff with Kubernetes. So with CSI, it's going to be much easier to do this integration, and it's going to be much better experience for the users. Yeah. Oh yeah, that's potentially a CSI might be also part of CNCF. Like CNI is a part of CNCF, so CNI right now is used by Cloud Foundry and by other Mesos, for example. Potentially CSI will be the similar thing. We don't know yet, but we'll see. Windows Server support. So that is really exciting for me. I have to do the workshop in 2 weeks, but yeah. So as you know, in Kubernetes, we could not run the Windows workloads so far, and we can run Windows.NET Core workloads, but there are still companies who has IIS, they have MySQL, Microsoft, they have all .NET application that run, and they want to use Kubernetes because they like it. So the company Apprenda and Ticketmaster helped, and Microsoft, of course, they pretty much work on this feature, and it's right now in beta. Potentially you can use it. I tried it, still there's a lot of problems, but you can at least start trying. So the main problem was networking, and there's 2-3 companies who worked around that. They kind of delivered some kind of networking, OVS networking, cloud-based, yeah. So the company in Czech Republic, cloud-based, they like Windows a lot, so they help to integrate networking. But now Calico as well and Flannel, they're going to be also supported by Windows servers. So basically, you still have your old Linux controllers, but what you can do now, you can attach Windows 2016 or Windows 1709 workers to your Kubernetes cluster, and you can run your .NET applications, hopefully, in Kubernetes. Actually, I downloaded one image. It was like 2 gigs. I was like, I don't know how people is gonna do that, but it's quite large. Huh? No. So Windows nodes is gonna be only slaves, or like workers we call it, or nodes, and you can have heterogeneous clusters where you have Linux workloads and Windows workloads on the same Kubernetes. So for the guys who have large deployments, I don't know if anybody has like more than 1,000 nodes cluster. Like, I thought, come on, guys, what's wrong with you? Yeah, but there are some guys, like for example, Nuantic, who is running Pokemon Go. There's few other companies that maybe Ticketmaster, we don't know exactly, but They have large clusters deployment, and they having problem with IP tables to expose services. So right now there's project in beta which is IPVS backed services. So IPVS is supposed to help to offload this and make it performance much better for the exposing services. We have some IPv6 lovers. Last meetup we had somebody like was cursing Kubernetes for not supporting it. So especially for that guy, we have announcing IPv6 support. It's still very early. They don't support dual stack, but like I saw the already planned for the 1.10 is going to be a lot of improvements, and it's going to be in beta. So this is feature especially for Montreal because we have so many machine learning and AI companies. So now Kubernetes also simplifies to run GPUs and machine learning on Kubernetes. Still in alpha, but it's going to be improving as well in the coming releases. And finally, CRD improvements. Like CRD is still getting better. And if you guys know what is CRD, no. Yeah, CRD is custom resource definitions. They replace TPRs, third-party resources, so you can kind of integrate your solution into Kubernetes. So you can do kubectl, and yeah, you can say kubectl, please get me pizza, and it's gonna get a call and bring you a pizza. So you can basically build in your own things. So a good example of CRD and operators could be a Prometheus operator, where you can say kubectl create Prometheus cluster, and it's gonna create. You say upgrade, it's gonna upgrade. So they kind of built in functionalities in kubectl, so you can have one CLI for everything. And at the KubeCon we said kubectl is a new SSH, so everybody should get familiar with it. All right, so finally, you probably get bored already by the things. I hope those things are quite exciting. And if you have any questions, I can take it right now. No? Okay, good. So we're gonna go forward. Actually, I don't know, I think Julie already mentioned, but like at KubeCon, one of the keynotes was kind of saying about Kubernetes community, how great it is and how diverse it is. So we have kids who is main developers of Kubernetes. Everybody knows Lucas, 16-year-old. He's a main contributor to kube8am project. But also we have a lot of nice ladies who works in Kubernetes and helping to move project. So Michelle Nulari, she's one of the presenters on the KubeCon. She is like one of the leads of the SIG applications, pushing the Helm project forward. But also today we have two special guests. Constance from Lyft, please welcome. Yeah. So Constance gonna tell us everything about Lyft's experience with Envoy, how it's working, and hopefully we're gonna learn more about Envoy, but also as I know, Lyft, I might be wrong, itself doesn't use Kubernetes a lot. They started this project Envoy before even using Kubernetes, but now they kind of looking more and more into using Kubernetes, and one of the main contributors to the Istio project. So hopefully we're going to learn how Lyft is going to be used, their system with Kubernetes. And maybe, I don't know, you guys going to announce today that you starting in Montreal as well? No? Okay. Yeah, I'm so tired of Uber, guys, so I really want to switch to Lyft. Okay, and for the second presenter today we have Cynthia. Please welcome. So Cynthia came all the way from Silicon Valley. She's from Covalent.io, but honestly, those two presenters are our Canadians. So it's really, really cool that we have our Canadian people in Kubernetes and in networking of like Cilium. So very, very excited to hear the talk. Myself, I want to just go and sit and enjoy. Yeah, cool. Thank you.
was working earlier. Let's do that. Archie's not working anymore. Let's see. It was working earlier perfectly. I just unplugged it and unplugged it. Right?
Try this
Try
one.
the other one, yeah. I think that one's a broken one, but
Oh, maybe we
I
don't
guess we
need.
can just do direct.
Yeah.
We can try that one.
Please work.
Please work.
Maybe you need to.
Okay, let's see if we can detect.
Can you try to
Yeah.
open? No, just open the presentation.
Oh, sure. No, it's not even recognizing it. It's not doing the funny. That's weird because it's working. We did do a tech check, but apparently it did not.
Today is. I don't know how Cynthia is going to do live demos today. Today is not day.
It's not even recognizing it.
Sometimes turning off the display
Yeah.
because making it sleep.
Sleep and try sign back on.
Yeah.
Might actually
Or maybe
recognize it.
sleep completely. Can you like turn
Yeah.
off the display?
No.
And then
Wait a second. Yeah, it's. Even when we do a tech check.
so should work.
Come on. Should I just send it as an email to you?
Yeah. So yeah,
It's not even recognizing it anymore.
used to work.
Here.
Can I try mine?
Yeah, go for it.
And then
Take whatever you need. Yeah. I'm going to send it to you right now. Sure and send. Okay. Get right over so you have more space.
Do we need to do anything? It seems to be on VGA. Okay, mine started.
Oh, yay! Okay, just send it to you.
Actually, I have it quicker even.
Oh, cool. This. Oh,
So this one.
cool. Well, I just sent that to you.
Yeah, I will using my phone. Yeah.
Cool.
So this is forward back.
Forward, back. Okay. Cool. Present. So it wouldn't be a presentation without at least one technical glitch. Thank you everyone for coming. Sorry for the short notice. I just booked my plane tickets, I think, 10 days ago, so that's why I had a little bit rush. My name is Constance. Probably a lot of you who use Envoy don't know me, but I've actually been working on Envoy since June of 2016. I've just mostly been working on Lyft's integration with Envoy and doing a lot of the slog work of some of the stuff we'll be talking about today. Yeah, and so that is my Twitter handle, but if I don't reply, it's because I just made a Twitter account 2 days ago, so I'm still learning how to use it. Oh, and I guess a little bit more about me. Other features in terms of like what I've done on Envoy is I've been working on network security, so I'm currently working on the IP tagging filter. I've done a lot of work in terms of the router, other HP filters, a lot of the V1 configs, and part of the V2 APIs. So yeah, it's a little about me. Pretty much, if you haven't heard this before, Envoy is meant to make networking easy for anyone around, right? And for anyone who's using it, and especially for application developers who don't want to know about networking, because I don't know about you, but I definitely interact daily with application developers who are intimidated by it. So this is a tool to make it as transparent as possible. A quick refresher of service mesh. As you can see, Envoy's running sidecar. Oh, I guess, and also one thing about this talk, I'm going to be doing a little bit of hybrid of Matt's migration talk from KubeCon. So if you want more details, please watch his talk. I'm also going to be talking a little bit about what we're doing as our next infrastructure improvement, which I think you guys can probably guess is Kubernetes related. So another set of Envoy refresher. These are some of our really awesome features. It's not a library, so it runs beside whatever service you want it to. C++, which I think is a great thing. Not everyone agrees with me on that. Observability is one of the other big pluses that we have. One thing that we didn't actually add here is there's a whole set of APIs to configure Envoy. So this was this was Lyft 5-ish years ago, probably 6 years now. It was really simple. PHP was our monolith. It communicated with Mongo. Yeah, and so this is how things look now, is that we actually still have that monolith, which is PHP. Then we have a whole set of Go services, Python services. We're actually starting to have a lot of other services like Java and other things that aren't fall under here, and they talk to all the different things: stats, DynamoDB, Mongo, Envoy Manager, which is something we'll be talking about a little bit later. So just, Sure. Oh yeah, sorry, I do speak quietly, so. So a little bit of how, like, this is going to be just a really short version of Matt's talk, but how did we go from what we had there to what is this, right? And it's a lot of coordination and making incremental progress and identifying one problem at a time. So this is the TLDR of it, right? We first started on Edge. We improved that. Everything was done with a lot of visibility, making sure that we didn't lose traffic from shadowing. We worked on the TCP proxy and Mongo connections because I was especially focusing on the monolith we had at the time. And so some features that we added were rate limiting to Mongo connections to avoid death spiral. We added better stats around Mongo. And at this point, Envoy is everywhere because we only had that. So once we started adding new services, we started making Envoy be sidecar to everything. But we ended up actually in a really interesting spot where we would have Edge Envoy, an internal ELB, Mesh Envoy, and services. And we really wanted to get to a point where we had direct connect and no ELB in between the Edge Envoy and Mesh Envoy. And so this is actually where the use of service discovery, we call it discovery service, original name, but this is where discovery service came in, so we can get rid of the ELB in the middle. And this is how it works, is that there's a cron job running on everything that is using Envoy, and it registers actually some entries to DynamoDB, and discovery service reads that and sends that to the envoys using the SDS API, which is a V1 API. Now this is, and so once again, this is how things look like. And that kind of makes things simpler going forward, because now we don't have ELBs, envoys everywhere. As Matt has said before in other talks, is that we have observability across the entire stack. Since Envoy is running there, like all of our key metrics and alarms are based off of Envoy's statistics. Like you can tell if your entire system's down based on success rate, then quickly with 2 clicks find out like, oh, it's routing, or like, sorry, bad username, location service is having a bad time and we should focus on remediating that. So one of the hard parts that we've been working through improving is actually the configuration of Envoy. the first iteration of it was actually using JSON YAML, and we would have a static file committed that had over 10,000 entries in JSON. We're very close to deleting it, only actually 1 week away from deleting the legacy one. But as you can imagine, it actually got really complicated really, really quickly. It also meant that people had to manage it. We were unfortunately the team that had to manage it, so we would have to do deploys every time someone added a new service or wanted to, someone put a bad route on Edge proxy. We would have to do another quick deploy of 2 hours just to get that out there. And so we actually did separate things between Edge and service, as we call mesh. One way that things got updated, so we have a little bit of like legacy, actually this is something we're going to be improving with Kubernetes, is that a lot of things got updated based on pull deploy. Pull deploy would check what SHA this service was running. Is it running old version of Envoy? Is it running old SHA of a service? And update that and force the update path. So in our world, we have 1 service per host, 1 Envoy per service, and 1 Envoy per host. And we use hot restarts every time we would say update Envoy or update a service. So to make things a little better, we came up with this thing called config-gen. And this is actually a way of templatizing all the different configs that we need to configure all the different services. For a point of reference, we have over 10,000 hosts running with over 200 services right now running at Lyft. Yeah, I think I heard a little bit of awe at that. It is a little crazy, and it's getting worse with time, or better with time, which is something we're working to improve. So pretty much, we have a lot of Jinja files that expand all of the templates that we need to configure Envoy across the fleet. Yeah. It's AWS. We're on AWS. Yeah. Well, they're in Seattle, so that's convenient. Yeah.
Curious, for the purpose of having a DynamoDB, aren't you just duplicating what you had in Mongo? Or are you doing a transition to DynamoDB? What exactly?
Oh, for the discovery service entry, that data was actually nowhere beforehand. So the ELB would handle all the IPs that are handling. So that, yeah. And we are trying to we preferred working with DynamoDB.
Okay.
Yeah.
Will Mongo still have a place in the
Yep. Yeah, I think as much as we try to get rid of our monolith, it will probably be there for a long time. And there is actually still active development on the Mongo filter that provides all the statistics and rate limiting that I was talking about. Yeah, so this is a way to make our Envoy configurations better. We have templates. We have ways for people to specify adding new routes, adding new services. So it's a combination of static and dynamic configuration. And by dynamic configuration, it's not as dynamic as like a service providing a response and API. It's actually a checked-in file that will take in inputs when a service is actually being spun up. So it's pseudo-dynamic, and that's one thing we're working on solving right now. And one way to solve it is actually with our control plane APIs. We have two versions of these APIs. We have V1, which are just JSON REST APIs, and they handled service discovery, clusters, routes, and we use these internally. We actually serve all of these via Envoy Manager, which I'll be talking about next. And this is actually a way to provide, so if someone wants to change a route or add a new cluster, or you need to do both in parallel actually, this will actually be able to provide those new endpoints quickly instead of having to deploy, which is very long. Yeah. No, sorry, these are our terminology. Also, I apologize in advance. I always get our references. Like I'll say instance instead of a pod when I refer to Kubernetes. I'm still learning. Actually, I probably should have attended your talks from a long time ago, because I still know very little about Kubernetes. Since we're only starting to adopt it now. But this is the world that we have right now, is that Envoy Manager handles all of the APIs that Envoy understands, and it pulls data from everywhere. It pulls data from S3, where we have a static config repository. Service manifest in our world are pretty much lists who you want to talk to, any special configuration for Envoy, and that gets processed to be able to handle our RDS, LDS, CDS APIs. So talking a bit more about Envoy Manager. Envoy Manager is written in Go. It serves, we're moving towards adopting our V2 APIs. The great thing about these V2 APIs is they're defined in proto, so we no longer have to do any checking if the format is correct, avoiding a lot of fat finger mistakes. We're already using it on front Envoy, our edge proxy. So when I was making a reference to our deploys earlier, one of our biggest developer pain point that we're trying to fix internally is that our team controls a lot of the configuration. We control when a new service gets added, a new route has to get added, and for the size that we're at, for referencing the 200 plus services we have, it's no longer scalable. We can't do a deploy every 10 minutes or every 3-4 days a week. So we had to actually come up with something to update routes on the fly. And so Envoy Manager serves these APIs to the envoys running everywhere. And that way this allowed developers to change routes within actually 20 minutes in case someone said put v2 something and that ends up 404 and we can fix that quickly instead of having to wake someone up from our team and do a deploy in the middle of the night. To that point, the next thing that we're working on blocking is new service spin up time. Just based on the way that we make our configurations, we won't allow people to specify, for better or for worse, a cluster or like a service that hasn't been properly vetted. And by properly vetted is that we maintain a whitelist of services that we can route to. So we actually, that is once again controlled by a current deployment process. So we need to actually serve these faster. So Envoy Manager is working on serving RDS and CDS for all of the sidecar envoys going through. And then we have future plans. By future plans, it's probably in the next few months that Envoy Manager is going to support LDS and other V2 APIs just to, for like the IP tagging filter I referenced earlier, we can start actually updating IP tags on the fly, and then you'll be able to say block a whole, subnet on the fly, and then have to reduce that traffic, stop that traffic from coming inside to your infrastructure. So, surprise, what is next for Lyft infrastructure? We're moving to Kubernetes, and we're really excited. And we're in the so I will say we're in the proof of concept stage. I'll get to this. So we have a lot of custom provisioning and deployment tools that we've grown or we've created ourselves over the past few years. And we know there are better things out there, and there's also a lot of things made in the industry by people who care, who do it properly. So we want to utilize those open source projects. We actually have a very limited deployment operation right now. We have staging, we have one canary instance per server, and then you have production. There is no safe way for us to do incremental rollouts, testing, other than say services hacking something up internally. So we need to start addressing this, especially for our size. As we also grow bigger and, example for autonomous, we're actually need to start having better data science workflows, and that's going to lend itself to smaller microservices and reducing the amount of cost that it takes for them to spin up a new microservice and take that down. And Kubernetes will help us a lot with that. We also are in a little bit of a weird limbo state where our development environment is actually running Docker containers with, is actually very different from a production environment, where our production environment takes an instance and after does all our salt and all of our setting things up, but our development environment is running on containers and runs out within it. So we need to unify that. So, back when we brought it up to containers, Kubernetes wasn't that big of a thing then, so that's why it didn't happen earlier. Yeah, so we're going to do this migration really incrementally. We're doing a proof of concept right now, so we're going to migrate 2 of our test services. It's called PyExample2 and GoExample2, very original names. And we need to have the goal in mind that we're supporting a hybrid environment. And by a hybrid environment is that we're going to be having most of our services at the start running in the old deployment system, and then after slowly migrate one service at a time in the new. And so we're going to have to find a way, the big thing that I care about is going to be routing between these services. No service is going to should have to differentiate oh, this is a service running Kubernetes, apply a different routing rule, use a different variation of Envoy client. And then other points is definitely developers not changing their workflow. To my earlier point that we have a lot of custom tooling, we have already existing flow in terms of development, testing, and we are going to make that seamless. We're working to make that seamless to everyone else, so if when they click a button to deploy, that is still the same thing, and underneath we'll be doing a lot of changes to abstract that away. A lot of this is falling on the infrastructure team. And I'm going to be focusing on the routing part, partially because I don't want to steal my coworkers' KubeCon presentations for the end of the year. And it also flows nicely with the configs I was talking about later on, or earlier. So right, to make routing work in this hybrid world, currently we have SDS API, and it's serviced by the discovery, and that handles the V1 configs. Sorry, the V1 APIs that Envoy handles. And this already knows about the legacy host, so it's already a great candidate to like add the new Kubernetes pod information. However, SDS is actually the V1, and V2, like the new iteration of the SDS APIs is EDS. It's a little bit of like a hand wave of saying it, but EDS is actually a lot more richer of an API. It provides opportunities to specify better load balancing configuration, so you pretty much, instead of having SDS returns a set of host, and the load balancing that you specify for that cluster is going to apply uniformly across everything. But once you move to EDS, it's called Endpoint Discovery Service, sorry about that, you're actually able to specify different load balancing off of different multi-sets within that host. So then that can actually work for different rollouts and deployments. One thing to point out is actually Kelsey Hightower did a little proof of concept. Actually, it's a really nice piece of code for taking Kubernetes pod information and returning that in the SDS format. So I suggest looking at that if you want to stay with the V1 configs. But we're going to go with option 2, which has Envoy Manager speak EDS and clobber both legacy and Kubernetes information in one. So what I was saying earlier, right, is more powerful. It provides better load balancing options and routing information. We also, this is part of our migration forward, as we're trying to deprecate some older stuff. And so Discovery Service has served us really well as we've gone from no Discovery Service and ELBs to where we are now. But let's only have one service that handles Envoy APIs, and so that will be Envoy Manager. And this is how it's going to look going forward. This is something that we'll be implementing in the next few weeks, where Envoy Manager is going to consume some data from Endpoint Manager, which is going to take the Kubernetes API server data information about the Kubernetes pods and also clobber that together with the legacy service information. And so like this actually is going to be really nice too, because then you can have, as you're doing rollouts of Kubernetes, you can actually have a service that has part of it in our legacy system and part of it in the Kubernetes world as we're deploying this through. Yeah, but I will going to say, this is all I'm going to talk about for now. This is stuff I'm mostly focused on, and yeah, it's one part of the many things that we're working on to migrate to Kubernetes, and there's a lot more to come, and yeah.
All right. Wow. This is so advanced that I don't know, half of the things I didn't understand.
Oh, sorry, please ask more questions.
No.
I know I have bias in terms of I'm used to seeing it every day.
But I think definitely this is a good time for questions, and I have my questions first. My questions first, and then just kidding.
Oh.
Where you place Salt during the migration? Do you continue to use Salt in your Kubernetes stack to maybe have a single endpoint for both stack?
I think since we're still in the proof of concept stage, last I heard, I think we're trying to reduce our amount of salt that we use. But I think that'll still be something we're going to figure out as we go through and learn all the mistakes we're going to make as we do it. But yeah, we do want to reduce a little bit of the salt we have. And another reason why we want to move to Kubernetes is like not be running salt on production, right? So at least we have some predictability about what our production images will look like, instead of, because we have had bugs where people had put a different variation in production and you led to unexpected behavior. So we want to catch that earlier and remove that variability. So I'm going to say reduce as much salt as we can, but we still appreciate it.
I read in your blog that you use Salt a lot, and since last year a guy who posts a lot of blog posts about Salt is excited about this.
Yeah.
Then it's why I try to understand if you really want to use Salt in Kubernetes in your Kubernetes orchestration, because you must still manage AWS assets, and it's not all managed by Kubernetes.
Yeah, I think we're gonna be another variation of a hybrid world, and we'll see how it goes. Like when I say proof of concept, we are still like we've had things running as of like maybe 2 months ago, some variation of proof of concept, so we don't have full routing between services. So this is very much the early stage. The next variation of this talk will be all the mistakes we've made as we were going to Kubernetes and all the assumptions we had made that are incredibly wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, I have kind of confusion. So
Yeah.
Envoy will replacing kube proxy in order to handle all the load balancing, routing, or how Envoy will handle this, like how this will be handling in the routing level, networking level.
I don't think we haven't made it. Let me get back to you on that one, because I think we're still deciding how we want to, like where we want to put Envoy and everything. Like we do want to maintain our sidecar model. Let me think of a better answer and get to you.
Kube proxy potential is still going to be there.
Yeah.
So the Envoy is pretty much is going to run in 2 places. It's going to be running with containers as a sidecar,
Yeah.
and also on the edge, it's going to be something ingress as well, like a proxy.
Like a load balancer or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It should communicate with kube proxy somehow in order to route the traffic, or it will not gonna work this way.
Yeah, the kube proxy is still going to be there, but the Envoy is going to like pretty much work as a sidecar inside of with each pod.
As its own container,
if
yeah.
you know, if you're familiar with ingress controllers like Nginx, this is going to probably replace those two.
Yeah. So we're still really defining what this looks like, and so we've identified.
But the good thing as well, like about Envoy, and I think like we have a lot of new people as well about Envoy, is that you can run Envoy inside of the Kubernetes as a service sidecar, but you can also run on the VM with your microservices that's there. So you can kind of bridge the world between legacy applications and containers and run them homogeneously inside the same environment, or if you have even hybrid cloud use cases where you have something running on-prem and something running in the cloud, you can also bridge this together by using secured TLS communication. So your traffic will be still kind of going back and forth between between legacy, let's say, running on-prem, and let's say in their case on Amazon, securely.
Forgive me for asking if you
Yeah.
could address this, but so completely at the edge, are you still using Amazon's load balancer, or do you have outside traffic hitting Envoy directly?
We have outside traffic hitting Envoy
Okay.
directly.
How is that set up exactly?
What do you mean by how is it set up?
Do you route it directly to that?
Yeah, so we have like a CNAME in place, and have to go straight to front on. Sorry, I'll say that slower. We have a CNAME in place. We have that, and that goes directly to front Envoy, and we handle there. There are actually no, sorry. There is sorry. No, I take that back. We have an ELB. No, we do have an ELB in front of front Envoy. Yeah, we do.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, we do. Yes, we still have those. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. Well, I guess there might be a way with. I'm not familiar enough with Envoy, so.
Yeah, no, we do have. Sorry, we do have the ELBs in front of front Envoy, and those go there, and then we do everything else there.
Thank
in front. There was a question, I think, right there, or yeah.
So 2 questions. The
Yeah.
the first one is like, so the plan for the migration is still to use Envoy, or no
Still
plans
use
to
Envoy.
use Istio?
We work closely with Istio. I think we're definitely at a point where we want to make as much progress as we can quickly. And since we already have Envoy in place and we already have a lot of stuff that Istio provided, the migration to that will be a lot. So right now we're working on Kubernetes, and then once we have a good story for that, we might assess that, but I don't really know what the official plan is. But we definitely, we are staying with Envoy for sure.
Okay, for
Yeah.
the question related to the Mongo filter,
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, does that thing support an endpoint, a Mongo cluster with SSH enable, or it has to be the Mongo clear text protocol over it?
Say that again?
So if I have a Mongo cluster with SSH enable, will it work for the monitoring interception of the traffic, or does Mongo needs to be running with in his plain mode?
I'm pretty sure we support I need to double check that. I need to look at the configuration for it, but I'm pretty sure we have that
Okay.
SSL. We can look at the config afterwards and options on that.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
Any other questions? It is a good question. I have like we don't tweak the Mongo filter as much anymore because it's been so stable. So that was a good curveball.
So we actually have fewer people here that don't want to tell, but like they actually right now in between Istio and Envoy.
Yeah.
Which one they should use?
Well, I'm
Today.
I am biased. What can I say?
Like because I mean Istio is like everything in alpha except
Yeah.
maybe monitoring.
The Istio people are wonderful. We work with them really closely, and they're really brilliant. I think you have to make. Okay. You need to make the assessment for yourself. I will say use Envoy, but also Istio has a lot of good options there. Whatever solution you're trying, like whatever problem you're trying to solve first, choose that first. Like address that first, and then after go to the next one. So if Istio solves some problem you're trying to figure out in the next few months, year, go down that path. Yeah, I can't.
Are you gonna open source any other tools that you're using? Like I don't know.
Envoy
How to use Envoy? I mean, like there's still like how to do, let's say, canary deployments, controlled canary deployments, how to do like all of those things. You probably figure out you have some nice UIs, maybe. I don't know.
We do not have nice UIs. We're working on it. We have made the joke that every time we try and hire some form of front-end developer, the rest of Lyft steals them from us.
Okay.
So we want those beautiful UIs. Yeah, we wish. But
Right.
otherwise, right now, everything's like in a file.
Are you also working with Heptio, which is who is building the control project, which provides an Envoy as an ingress controller for Kubernetes?
Maybe. So the only reason why I say maybe is because I'm trying to, like, I associate people by names. And so, like, since I've talked to Shroom and some people enough, I know they're working on Istio. I would have to check. I don't know.
Yeah, I think just you know, in the Lyft there's definitely different people working on different positions. There's some people more like working internally, like Constance, for example. But right now, Envoy is part of CNCF, right? So Heptio, as you said, they're delivering a new ingress controller called Contour, and the idea is replace Nginx controller as an ingress, basically, and have the Envoy potentially the standard ingress controller for Kubernetes. The idea is you wanna have everything sidecars with Envoy, and you wanna ingress with Envoy, so you have like everything in Envoy at the end of the day. And because I think the main benefits versus other solutions like Proxy or Nginx, first of all, or Linkerd, for example, Envoy is lightweight, written in C++, and also pretty much like Nginx has interest about their project. They have Nginx Plus. Like Lyft is not planning to commercialize the Envoy project, right? So they're using it themselves and they donate it to CNCF. So right now it's pretty much a community's project and everybody can contribute to it. So we'll see.
Hi, Constance.
Hi.
What drivers, or not drivers, but how did you decide how to approach the migration to deploy on Kubernetes? Like, was it simplicity? Was it which features you needed to you wanted to deploy before the others? Was it you drew something from a hat?
I will probably not do this answer justice. And to like Paul and Jan, who are probably watching, they're probably giggling right now with their laptops. I think we've always wanted to have some variation of a container world, and yeah, I'm gonna think about this one. I don't know how to answer that. I might have to like ask them what they did the biggest choice.
Like
this.
for example, how you guys do auto scaling? Is it something
Oh.
you guys interested about, or?
We do auto scaling with Amazon based off of like like CPU, or we use Amazon for a lot of that. We're just starting to get at a point where a lot of our tools need to actually like improving them to reach our scale is sometimes becoming too much. Requires a lot more dev time than being able to reuse something else. It's like we're kind of at this right point where we should probably go for industry standard instead of having always our own homegrown. Yeah.
Closer because people cannot hear.
Services. We're still doing our dummy services. Like, are you talking about our services, or we're doing? So we actually are using. Oh, I don't know if I can talk about that part. We're doing the proof of concept with some of our simple services just to make sure everything works and try and figure out the kinks. And then after, we're gonna probably start we're gonna find other services. Like, there are some people who are eager to move to it, and we're gonna use them first as shepherd. So that we're just kind of going for anyone who wants to work with us in terms of migrating over. So not a good answer, but it's something we want to get everyone towards. Yeah.
All right, thanks, Constant.
Okay.
Oh, there's more questions.
More question?
Maybe we can take it because we want a second presenter
Yeah.
prepare. But like, let's have a conversation. Please welcome Constance.
Thank you,
Thank you so much. So now we are waiting for Cynthia to set up. She's from Kingston originally. So we're gonna have live demos of Cilium. Is it Star Wars or?
You'll see.
Okay. No, we can see everything here. We see your face and we see the screen. Yeah.
I gotta make a little joke. Now might be a good time to lift up if you need a break, stretch your legs. Sorry, I come from a pun-heavy shop here, so.
You need clicker or you're fine?
Sorry?
You need clicker or you're fine?
Which one?
Clicker.
Oh, click. Sure. Why not? Where is the camera? Oh, there. What's going on here? Should we try to go into that one?
This way. Maybe like this.
Oh, okay. Dangling. Let's see. Okay.
Do you want to put Star Wars music?
I wish, eh? Do people get tired or what? How long does it usually take till 9? Just try to get through it. Otherwise it's too long.
Yeah.
I don't think it's... So which one? I should use this one, you said?
Yeah, I think
Take it
this
off?
one is better.
Okay.
Well, if you want to take it off. I think we can start, right?
Oh, the bathroom line? Shit. Huh? No, I don't need to go. But like, it's okay we start? I don't know. It's not picking it up?
No. It's okay.
That's so funny. Should I step around here?
Yeah.
Did you want me to Did you want me to? Huh? Yeah, just go ahead. Okay. Okay, is everybody ready? All right, I'm last talk of the night. Hope you're not all tired yet. So my name's Cynthia Thomas. I'm a technology evangelist at Covalent.io, so supporting the open source project Cilium. Before this meetup, how many people have heard of Cilium before? Just a handful. Okay, cool. I'm excited to be here to educate you further on it. This is a heavy title, right? Application-aware security from microservices via BPF. How many people have heard of BPF before? Okay, a handful. I'm here to help you understand what this whole title means. Throughout this talk, I'm going to talk about what each of these keywords mean, and hopefully you grasp something from that. So yeah, as Archie mentioned, so Cilium fits into the Kubernetes platform as a CNI plugin, but what we're actually really focused on is the security aspects behind the networking. So yeah, as I mentioned, Archie mentioned I am Canadian, so I'm happy to be home here. My background is more on the hardware networking side, and now I'm focused more on open source networking and security solutions. So I've been with Cilium and Covalent for about 6 months now, so excited to be here. Just to give you some more appreciation of why Cilium was built, thinking about how applications used to be developed, those heavy monoliths, .NET, right? You would deploy on a big server, a bare metal server, let's say. It was a big delay in terms of delivery and time to resources. You had a big design cycle, and then finally the delivery of the product. It took forever, maybe even to just get your resources. It wasn't working too well, I think. Oh, okay, it is working. And then, of course, we moved to the 3-tier app. We were able to, let's say, oversubscribe our servers using virtual machines. So the actual operational complexity increased a bit because we had to decide, how do we deploy these VMs. Some of the self-service platforms like OpenStack came. And then basically we tried to increase the delivery frequency of the software cycle. Finally, we've moved into the microservices era, and so what that does is give companies the ability to deliver software much more quickly and choose a best of breed in terms of certain functions back-ended for a certain application. Of course, under the hood, there's a lot of operational complexity that goes along with deploying these pods, the speed of deployment, and that's where Kubernetes comes in, helps simplify those things for the deployments, and enables companies to deliver software at a much faster rate. So the problem here is that the network security is actually lagged. And I don't mean offense to anyone who may be deploying this way, but in terms of the granularity that you get with the more traditional networking security options, we're going to talk about why it's problematic in the microservices era. So the world is still running on IP tables, and that's fine when we were just using firewalls to block IPs and ports. We'd make some IP tables rule, we'll modify it, and try to basically secure workloads behind these IP tables rules. Well, as you can imagine, in the microservices era, with pods coming up and down, the IPs are actually ephemeral, right? So managing those IP tables rules is kind of almost meaningless, and as well as with the delivery of applications, basically you may be serving these up behind a RESTful API. So as soon as you open up a certain port, your HTTP port, for example, it's basically this overloaded port, and basically as soon as you have access to a port, you have access to everything behind that port. So let's just go through a little cute example here. We have Gordon. He's an intern, and he has an idea. So he's been tasked with tweeting out all these job services. So basically at this company, he's interning. He's a newbie, right? So I don't know how much we trust him and his coding experience. He might be brilliant, but do we want to take the chance? So he has access to the company's job services API. And there's various calls that could be made from this job services API, whether it be the get health, get jobs, get applicants, post jobs. So Gordon has access to this API to write his code and tweet out all the job postings. So what he really needs to do is just basically just take this specific API call and tweet it out. And he's doing due diligence. He's got the right developer etiquette. Just checking. I'm good. Everyone can hear me, right? I'm just okay. So he's using TLS, so there's no tapping in between to see the code. And all he needs to do is hit that API on that certain call and tweet it out. So we mentioned he's kind of a newbie. What's the problem here? Well, maybe there's an IP tables rule to protect against accessing the API, but he can access actually the whole API, right? So this IP tables rule can really only specify the IP and port of this API service. So what happens? What could happen? Well, we don't always trust, a newbie necessarily, or let's say his code is compromised. Well, he could actually post the wrong job or get applicants. Sensitive data could be accessed as soon as he has access to this jobs API service. So in turn, as you can imagine, what I'm trying to relay here is that all these API calls are actually exposed when Gordon and his little tweeting service only really needs access to a very specific API call. So IP tables in this microservices era in the end is not sufficient. So from a security perspective, this is not least privilege. So we go back to the drawing board. How could we better handle this? Does anybody have any ideas? It may have been in the title of my talk. If we're application aware or API aware. So if we can have a security solution that narrows down the API call, then we can lock down basically what each of those microservices can speak to. And that means actually having knowledge of the API. So in this case, it would be this HTTP header and call, and actually specifying what microservice can make which specific API call. So that way, when you have a newbie like Gordon come on, he's not necessarily going to handle issues. Yep.
How do you handle dependencies?
Which dependencies?
If you have dependent microservices, it can immediately impact the functionality. How do you speak that to the dependencies?
So we basically, you can leverage the dependency table definitely, and every pod basically is covered by an identity label basically. So we can control which services are talking to what, and as it propagates down, we can basically lock down which services are talking to each other. Yep. Yeah, well, so there's definitely several approaches, but one thing that's the Cilium, when it's being more application aware, is being as agnostic to the application as possible, so not enforcing at the application, inside the application. And also, basically these pods are coming up and down quickly, so in the end, we can enforce based on the pod no matter where it is in the environment on the platform.
Overview of your virtualization.
Yep, I have a slide coming up for that. Yeah. No, this is just a kind of an introduction to what the problem we're trying to solve here. So that was the intro to what we're trying to solve here. So I'll do a little demo first off. Let's see here. Oh, that's not the one you want. guys see that all right? All right. So you guys know that a long time ago, in a container cluster far, far away, it's a period of civil war. So the empire has adopted the microservices and continuous delivery. Oh, getting stuck here. It's tragic. Yikes. What are we going to do? Despite this, the rebel spaceships. Oh, sorry. It's like scrolled up. They're going to strike a hidden cluster, basically. And they won their first victory, and the rebels have managed to steal the Swagger API of the Death Star. All right? So this is exciting here. But let me just make it more legible here on the screen. Okay, does that look better? Okay. So yeah, we have this cluster. Basically, Cilium is running, and the Empire starts deploying the Death Star. Okay. So this is basically a diagram of what's going on here. So these spaceships can, request a landing. Here's the API behind the Death Star. There's a cargo bay. You can actually get the hypermatter reactor status. So there's various APIs that the Death Star is providing. Yeah. Move it up. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. All right. Not on this, but yeah. So they're going to deploy the Death Star, right? There's some spaceships too, and they're doing their due diligence the traditional networking way, which was implying this layer 4 policy. So the Death Star landing was created. We can take a look. Oh, and good, there's good internet here, so these pods came up really quickly. And so the Death Star service is launched, and they've done their initial layer 4 policy as well for security. So we have a couple of spaceships, the Death Star, everything's HA. Let's see. Oh, yeah. All right. So now the Alliance kind of knows what's going on because they have the API spec for the Death Star, and they're going to go send out some X-wings. So let's see if these X-wings came up. Well, they're swift in their light, so they get spun up really quickly too. So they're up and running. So the X-wings are circling around Death Star, and check it out. And now it's time to hit that API point. Let's check out what it is. Ooh. So it's some of those things we suspected. Also the exhaust port. Uh-oh. So now we know we do an API scan, and some things are vulnerable. Weakness. Uh-oh. That's good for the rebels, right? We all know what's coming. So in the meantime, Empire has, the Galactic Empire has deployed Cilium, actually. So they have their layer 7 policy. Things are happening swiftly here. So the Alliance has come back. They think they've got it in the bag, but the Death Star. Oh, shoot. Layer 7 policy saved the Galactic Empire this time. Oh, is it a trap? What are we going to do? Oh, we scan the API again. Oh, man, things are protected now. So, Luke, we need your help. Right? Luke's always coming to save the day. So, investigate the loaded policy. Luke came in, snuck in this new policy here. Oh, looks like all we need to do is use the Force. So, let's try our next attack. X-Wing uses the Force. Bam! Death Star exploded. All right, so yeah, that's it for the demo. That's one for the rebels, right? All right. So, actually, you don't want to look at all that. So what happened under the hood, right? That was a lot of explaining of the layer 7 policy. We kind of understand that now. We understand application aware, meaning we can get down to the API specifics and create a policy. And then I mentioned, so why is that important in the microservices world? We don't have to actually leverage our traditional methods with IP and ports because they're ephemeral in the container world. And we can be as agnostic to the application as possible in terms of not interfering with an application pod to define our policy. Does anyone remember that last bit in my title? I actually asked if anybody knows it. Yeah, BPF. So that's where BPF comes in. So BPF, if anyone's ever used TCP dump, you're actually using BPF, Berkeley Packet Filter. So it gives you a cool way to look at things look at basically packets right down to several filters. So this is it's decades old technology and has been recently extended to provide a lot more functionality and flexibility. And this is where Cilium leverages BPF. So it's gained a lot of backing, not only by contributors to Cilium, but Facebook and Netflix, these kind of large companies are contributing to BPF. And so it can be leveraged for security as we're using it, tracing, policy, as I said, and load balancing even. So there's a lot of exciting things happening. And this BPF is happening right in the Linux kernel, so it's all upstream as well. How Cilium, what I also didn't mention actually, is what's cool about BPF is it's basically executing code, bytecode in the Linux kernel. And that sounds a bit intimidating unless you're a Linux kernel developer. Some of these programs are basically, BPF is written in C and it gets compiled on the fly and then installed into the Linux kernel. So why this is better than previous approaches like Linux kernel modules, which are notorious for resetting a host if something goes wrong and it crashes, is that the BPF code is actually limited to a specific instruction set. And that means every time a BPF code is programmed, it goes through this compiler that basically checks it for safety. So it doesn't allow for infinite loops. And it only allows a certain number of instructions. There's other ways to kind of work with it. You can start chaining BPF programs together. But the bottom line is it's the sandbox that's basically very safe to deploy. And what's cool is you can deploy it on the fly, which is how Cilium leverages it when you do policy updates and you won't drop a packet. So a lot of cool stuff there under the hood. It's just like a mini little sandbox that's safe to use. And that's exactly what Cilium is doing. It's basically making it human consumable and allowing people like us to leverage it and not having to write these C codes and such. So where Cilium fits into Kubernetes is basically enforcing that network security policy and all being done in the Linux kernel. So it's basically taking the policy, converting it to BPF, making those BPF programs as pods are coming up on your Kubernetes worker nodes and installing it on the host. And so that actually, there's so many advantages because of the flexibility with BPF. And the way it works is basically there's a lot of performance and performance gains, and as well as minimizing CPU utilization and latency implications as well. So the way you could think of it in a Kubernetes world is a BPF program would be installed when every single pod comes up. So that would enable, whenever the pod is talking, it will go through this BPF program, determine whether the packet can flow or not, depending on the policy, and allow the packet to go on. Yeah, did you have a question?
What are the parameters that invoke its compilation in real time? What parameters adjust its behavior? Are there polymorphisms?
So what kind of parameters are you thinking, actually? So basically, all that's really required is a minimum Linux kernel version, like a more modern version, where this BPF code is being extended. It's actually already in the Linux kernel.
So the
Yeah, yeah.
static. Why is it compiling real time if the parameters are not, if other parameters are not variable? Are there memory usage parameters or?
So when I mean it's dynamically swappable, this is if a policy were to change, for example. Okay. Yeah. So that would happen on the fly as a configuration change might happen in terms of network security. Yeah, exactly. So there's several ways to interact with the Cilium daemon set. Basically, this is how you would install it in Kubernetes. It would be a daemon set. So a single Cilium agent on every single worker node. And then there's several CLI commands that you can do to take a look at what Cilium is doing to enforce the policy. And then plugins, some obvious ones like Kubernetes, Mesos, basically fit into Kubernetes as a CNI plugin. Basically, we're acting as the network layer, but we don't require a lot to be done on the network side. We're more focused on the security aspects and having that API awareness. Yep. The monitoring side? Yeah, so yeah, BPF provides that API basically that enables you to retrieve that type of information on that. Yeah, exactly. And that's where like we have the Cilium monitor function, gives you more information on a per flow basis and policy as well. Well, so there's different things you can do to like have, you can basically use a policy trace to determine whether a certain policy can be invoked or not. But other than that, it would depend also on the API specifically. Like, so we've started with HTTP, and so we can return like a 403, for example, if the access is denied. So yeah, right, yeah, exactly. But then, so what we're believing is that being API aware means that we understand the protocol that's being spoken, and you can define your policy for that. So we started with HTTP for that, the obvious reason that a lot of people are writing RESTful applications behind an API. But then with the customers and users that we work with also wanted the same kind of functionality on the Kafka side. So for example, you could enable only certain producers or certain consumers to track a certain topic, for example. And so you can define a policy based on Kafka as well. Yep. Yeah, so yeah, the question is about the encrypted traffic and using HTTPS. I'm going to address it in some coming slides. Yep. How do we gain access to the containers? So, yeah, that's a great question. So this is actually where Cilium is trying to not interfere with the actual container and not modifying the container itself. We are just like tethering the container, and any traffic coming out of the container will then go through to a BPF program on the main host. Yeah. Exactly. The BPF lives on the kernel. That's right. Yep. It's the same service. I think it would depend on like how you define the policy based on labels, for example. Like if there's a redirect, so we would have to understand who is doing the redirect, and that maybe that policy or that pod would have to be defined with a certain label, for example. So it would be more understanding where that proxy or rewrite would happen. Yeah, the path and method, basically. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no problem. So this is a Kubernetes meetup, so I better talk about how it integrates. Sort of talked about it. So standard resources you might be using basically on the network policy side. So layer 3 or layer 4, these are kind of like the essentials, the basics, right? Can't do much without that. Services, whether it be the cluster IP, the node port, load balancer, pods, so pod labels as we were just talking about, and then node IP to node CIDR mappings. So that's great from the standard resources perspective, or it's the Kubernetes network policies defined. But what Cilium does differently and how they can enhance the security policy for your microservices is where we fit in with the custom resource definition. Or third party, depends on what version of Kubernetes you're using. And so that's where we can actually get more fine-grained with the functionality that Cilium and BPF are providing. And that's where you can start defining your policies at the application level, so the API calls, understanding the protocols. So we've just been starting basically with HTTP, Kafka, gRPC, so we understand these at that call level. We continue to grow, so we'd love to hear what people would love more protocol understanding to define your policies based on. Yep.
Do you plan to have compatibilities with Kubernetes when the
Yeah, absolutely. We fit into all the Kubernetes versions. So the network policy, you could basically you don't have to explicitly run Cilium and type Cilium CLI commands to understand it. The way you can define the policy is you can do it your normal way with your Kubernetes network policies, and where you're going above and beyond, you can use the custom resource definition, define the Cilium network policy through YAML or JSON, and then that's how it would be invoked on the Kubernetes platform. Yeah.
Sorry, just to make sure. So this, what he's asking is the first thing, not network policy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're saying about the Cilium network policy, that basically you can create one policy that will affect both L3, L4, and L7 in one place.
Yeah, exactly. So as I mentioned, Cilium is a networking interface. That's how it fits into Kubernetes. So we do have two modes, the first being overlay. So we're pretty agnostic to how you want to do things. People just have their opinions. So you can use an overlay, Geneve or VXLAN to tunnel between. But all of the policy would be enforced before it even leaves, before it's even hitting the Linux routing on a host. So you can make a decision based on the Cilium policy, and then the next would be the native routing. Again, you're just deciding on the policy, and then and send it out on the Linux interface. So you can basically further define the policies from and to pods based on their labels. So these are just some examples of a layer 3 policy. You can go on a whole CIDR, for example, so from a certain pod to a certain CIDR. And then get down to the layer 4, getting more fine-grained. So for a certain pod, you can access only a certain port. So this might be a more sort of traditional method for legacy type architectures. But what's more important on the microservices side and Kubernetes is actually being API aware or application aware to define your policy. So this is where you can get as specific as the path and methods and the HTTP header as an example. So how are these enforced? Well, so Cilium is an open source project and it continues to grow. So we have contributors to Cilium, contributors to BPF kernel. All of these, all the BPF code is an upstream Linux kernel. So layer 3 and layer 4 is leveraging BPF in the kernel. So the implications I mentioned earlier, like the latency benefits, CPU utilization, which we'll talk a little bit further more about if we have some time. All right, going along. So layer 7, sidecar proxy or K-proxy, kernel proxy, BPF. So Envoy was like a perfect example of a sidecar proxy. So the functionality that Cilium provides with BPF gives you a lot of hooks to do a lot of different things. So currently we actually can leverage Envoy in user space to do some kind of functionalities like layer 7, for example. And then eventually, so work is also being done to actually understand these HTTP protocol, for example, in the kernel proxy, in which case we'll be able to leverage just BPF Linux kernel abilities, which will have amazing performance.
What is a kernel proxy? Is an application you build?
This is, it's actually kind of just a name that, basically it is providing this application awareness right in the Linux kernel. Yeah. So it's just having the right hooks to understand layer 7 aspects of the packet. Yeah. So it's an ongoing current upstream project basically. Yeah. That we're leveraging. So people on the Cilium team are contributing to this part of the code, so it's cool. Yeah. So just a little refresh, but I guess you kind of already heard because of the previous talk on Envoy. So what is a sidecar proxy? Well, so you sort of saw some of the deployments. A lot of the times with Envoy, it's deployed alongside a service. So Cilium actually gives a lot of options. You can leverage the sidecar that might be deployed on a per service basis. So these requests would go through this sidecar proxy. And whatever the sidecar proxy can do is the functionality you're going to get out of it, obviously. So Cilium gives you that flexibility with BPF to punt towards whatever proxy you need to, perhaps. So Also, Cilium can also leverage basically Envoy in a more shared aspect, so you wouldn't have to be launching it on a per service or per pod basis. So these are like some of the advantages on the flexibility side that you get. But some of the things to think about are when you're punting to a service sidecar proxy, there's actually these memory copies of the TCP/IP stack that are happening. And this has implications on the CPU utilization, latency. So some of the cool things that I mentioned is like, how do you turn this sidecar into a race car? So this is where this K proxy, so you know, the more things you can do in the kernel, the less times you're doing memory copies of the TCP/IP stack for these workloads, and the more things are staying in the kernel and happening at a super fast rate. So bypassing some of those unnecessary copies is some ways that the upstream community through kproxy and Cilium is helping leverage these hooks to have some amazing performance for microservices. Yep.
And then if it's a key proxy, it's not on a container because we must use the privileged containers. But it may be or
There's no
install I don't know in English in the system on a host level.
It's in the kernel itself, actually. So K proxy doesn't sit in user space in a container. It sits right in. It would be like a.
It could be a privileged containers, but it's not a good.
Well, the privileged container may be for the side proxy, perhaps, but kernel proxy, the K proxy functionality for having the layer 7 awareness right in the kernel, it would not be leveraging containers. So some other cool things are the socket redirect. So this is some of the implications of avoiding having these TCP/IP stack it's even actually the formation of the TCP/IP stack. So that basically saves a lot of CPU utilization and makes things happen at a lightning speed on the host. So here's some, like, take this with a grain of salt. This is just some initial testing on a host. Basically, what this socket redirect means is basically it's this hook that it's even faster than like having no proxy at all, because it's not even forming this TCP/IP packet. Like, it's not taking the payload and putting it in a full packet. So you can do these socket redirects of workloads. There's a lot of implications by doing things. This is obviously on the same host. But basically, there's a lot of like implications of being able to have the knowledge of this traffic class, and then some of the other proxies. Obviously, as I mentioned, you have these multiple TCP/IP stacks that introduces the latency. So really cool technology under the hood. But what's making it consumable by people like me or maybe people like you is where Cilium comes in. So it's kind of like the before and the after. Is like you're saving a lot of CPU utilization, which has implications on latency as well, to be able to do some of this higher layer policy. Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, so some example, I think it was Facebook, for example. They leverage BPF like through XDP to they have a chart. I think it's like NetDev or one of those conferences. They have a performance graph of IPVS versus XDP and BPF, and absolutely has like magnitudes better performance. There's a lot of implications. Pardon? You would get advantage of BPF with Cilium as well, but it is a BPF specific like advantage basically on that for the load balancing. Not on the load balancing side. We're not focused on the load balancing. But if you're fitting in as the plugin, then you would be taking advantage of the BPF functionality. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so absolutely. So the things that Envoy is not able to proxy, for example, handling it with Cilium will give like a faster data path by handling certain things in the kernel itself. So like today it would be like layer 3 and layer 4 functionality. Not having it to punt it to Envoy means you can just leverage it for the benefits of keeping the data path in the kernel. So in summary, thanks for your attention so far. I know it went from a simple example to super deep, but I wanted to hit on some of the, so you understand some of the benefits on the underlying technology. But Cilium in general, it's not just Kubernetes specific, but this is like where a lot of our main focus is fitting in as that CNI plugin to enforce the application-aware security policy. As I mentioned, the networking itself as a CNI plugin can fit in as an overlay or native routing. And then all those, the host of things from layer 3 to layer 7, giving you the ability to define the policies that way. At the layer 7 level, as I mentioned, today we are supporting HTTP awareness, Kafka, and gRPC, load balancing through this XDP BPF. And then just some of the dependencies that you were leveraging the KV store for storing the security identities and such. I think, so that's my talk, and I think hopefully you got something out of each of these words, right? Like a little bit of understanding. Thanks. Questions? Yeah.
Oh. Yeah, I think you have a good practice before going to Ottawa, because like a lot of networking folks there that is going to be drilling you with questions.
Oh, I know.
But we
my
also
old
have like few
hometown.
networking guys here. Hopefully
Okay,
we'll have
cool.
good
Yeah,
questions.
no, I'm
So
going to be hanging around as long as you guys want to talk. So.
do you guys have more questions? I actually want to ask, so a lot of us actually here using Calico right now.
Mm-hmm.
And you already mentioned that using the firewall rules is probably not the best way. So this is one benefit that Cilium versus Calico, but like, is any other comparison between those two? Because Calico is also using kernel features.
Oh yeah, so I'm not aware of which kernel features they are, but so what Cilium is bringing is providing the multiple protocol suite of network policy definitions. So that's where we move with HTTP, Kafka, gRPC, and we continue to grow that protocol suite of how to define secure network policy. And then leveraging, so we actually do fit in and leverage Envoy, so we can complement it, as I mentioned. And then we just continue to grow things using that BPF technology under the hood, which has so many implications for the future. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. Yep.
So when you're using eBPF inside the kernel, and when you're parsing HTTP requests or responses, what you end up doing is you end up buffering responses within the kernel memory, because you want to, so for example, URL, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you want to parse the whole URL before you give a decision.
Right.
So a URL could be pretty long at
Right.
that point. Now that may end up consuming a lot of kernel memory. If there was no, let's say, kproxy, everything would have gone to user space, but since you're using a middleman, you're buffering a lot of the requests. So how do you deal with like performances which arise due to excessive memory usage in the kernel?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I am not a Linux kernel developer, so I can't. I'll have to get back to you on more specifics of that, like how we can adjust kernel memory. This is his area. Yeah, then you probably know the answer, actually. But yeah, I could follow up with like how specifically Cilium can help manage that. Yeah. But
Okay, one more question.
Let's say I'm using third-party WAFs, for example, Cloudflare or F5. Then why should I take this headache of changing my Kubernetes code and playing with my Kubernetes clusters?
Sure. So it depends. Depends what you're using those WAFs and with load balancer, firewall. Typically, that type of architecture has a more centralized pain point or hairpinning that can happen in the architecture, sending the traffic to it, or even if it's some kind of virtualized appliance, it might have to live somewhere where the traffic is getting hairpinned to and from that box. And as I mentioned, so a lot of the advantages here are leveraging the decision making in the kernel and having the end-to-end east-west traffic in a Kubernetes cluster, and just the simple insertion via using our CNI plugin for Kubernetes and defining the using the custom resource definitions for the more advanced network security policies. These are the things that make it easy to use Cilium in the Kubernetes environment for a security policy solution.
Say I'm running the Kubernetes cluster in Amazon or Google Cloud or Azure. You guys tested it there, like does their VM support this kernel features?
Yeah, so it really depends on whatever the host OS would be. So in the end, we're kind of agnostic to where it lives because we're just an agent on the host. Yeah, so it just needs to be that newer Linux kernel version. Yeah, supporting BPF.
Thanks.
Oh, there was 2 questions. So I think you're. Sorry, which one? Store. So yeah, the KV store dependency. Typically you can just use like etcd or console for the security identities stored. Yeah. One more question.
Kind of understanding question. So that you mentioned that using CNI, so it basically it's a Linux bridge. Is it Linux?
No,
bridge?
it's not. So CNI, we are the CNI plugin. So you don't have to leverage the Linux bridge.
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, like, what in the end that Selim use, like Linux bridge, OVS bridge, what kind of underlying networking in the kernel level they use?
Yeah, basically there's like VETH pairs that are tying some of these pods together in a namespace, and then from there we can leverage to tie to the Linux.
Yeah, so for every pod there are VTS, and then you put the small BBF.
BPF.
In order, to drop
to make
the
a
packet.
decision. Yeah.
So what I understand. So now when the traffic is reaching from a service from outside, it goes through the IB tables rule, direct the traffic from this service IB to the pod IB, and then when it reaches the VTS of the pod, it's just dropping or allowing based on the network policy. Is that correct? How it works?
So I think you're more focused on the ingress. So it depends on what the ingress solution would be. This is more focused on the east-west between pods security solution.
Okay, so it's between both communications, not between the outside communication that's coming.
You can do like to world like an external entity, but I think what you're talking about is more. It sounded like ingress, right, coming in from the outside world.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks.
So it would be like replacement to Flannel or Calico, let's say.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but the more advantages on the security side. So you're understanding the protocols that are happening for pod-to-pod communication and giving the least privilege to those pods. So it's solving more of a security problem. We're kind of like keep the networking dumb and
Do you also plan integrating like an encrypted overlay or some?
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot to talk about the KTLS. So today we can leverage Envoy encrypting traffic and terminating the traffic there, and then in the future like KTLS work is being done upstream, which will leverage like the termination in the kernel. Yeah, sorry, I forgot to address that question earlier. Yeah.
That's it. No more questions. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Cynthia.
Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. I think this is it for the talks. We're gonna hang out for like. Oh wait.
Can't just end that way. Okay, you have to help me with this. Okay, we have to pick like whoever puts their hand up first for something. Right?
Okay, so we have some swag for the people who had.
Two things. Okay, the first person who can tell us the 3 protocols that Cilium can parse on can get a T-shirt. Oh, he came first. He has his hands up.
HTTP, Kafka, and TCP.
TCP is layer 4?
And gRPC.
Yeah, he got it. Okay. Congrats. And then the other thing I'd like for you guys to participate is if you can kindly go to our. Well, okay, for a few things. You can try, we have a bunch of getting started guides, really easy, using Minikube. So you can go try them here with this link. If you can star us on our GitHub repo, we're gonna track everybody who stars today and pick a winner for a $25 gift card. So I encourage you all to go home. I know some of you are on your laptops, we all have to work some hour. Star us on GitHub and you'll be entered in the draw and I'll get your info and find you on GitHub, stalk you on GitHub and give you. Already? Awesome. And I appreciate if you follow us on Twitter. A lot of our updates are there, BPF newsletters, etc. So thank you. I heard that. Okay, thank you. Merci.
Guys, see you might be in 2-3 weeks. I don't know. We'll try to figure out for the next meetup very soon. And thanks a lot for Constance from Lyft. And thanks a lot for Cynthia for coming all the way to Montreal. Guys, if you have any questions, please, we're still around if you want to pass by and ask questions. So, but thanks a lot. We'll see you guys very soon.
I also have